In this video, what I try to introduce to you is how you can formulate questions related to geographical inquiry. So this is not only talking about how would you formulate question with regard to fieldwork, but what I try to do is to introduce what are the way in which you can ask geographical questions, because asking the right question is the beginning to ask of the success of an academic project. I here find one of the kind of framework by Grant Clayman very useful when we are trying to understand what are the geographical questions that you can ask whenever we think about when you are trying to design a geographical inquiry, when you are trying to do a geographical research. So what are the possible questions that you find? In your research design, when you think about the research question, you need to think about what are the kind of different levels of analysis. For example, some would talk about something factual, some would be talking about something question about conceptual, other would be looking for some kind of like talking about assumptions, other would involve ethical judgment. So on the whole, when we are thinking about this kind of issues, we can take a look at the issues about, for example, we have empirical questions. That is to say, you are trying to find out facts about something. You are trying to do fact finding. It can be something related to theoretical questions. For example, how valid is a theory in explaining certain kind of like development? So for example, you may be talking about theory related to for example, urban developments and spatial development, how those spatial models can be explained to reality. These are theoretical questions. It may be something about ethical questions. For example, should zoos be allowed to operate? Should zoos keep animals? So in a way, these are also geographical questions as well. So in thinking about the kind of like geographical questions that you can ask in a geographical project, then you have this variety of types of questions. So the first type of question that you can ask is you are trying to ask for factual informations. For example, one of the most easiest one would be trying to ask how frequent are those bus services in London. So in a way, for example, if you want to try to see whether London is a city that promotes sustainable transport, then one of the questions that you should ask is how frequent are the bus services, because you need to examine whether people rely on public transport more or they rely on driving more. So in a way, this question can help you answer the question of sustainable transport. The second type of questions, which is related to theory, is the conceptual questions. For example, what do you understand by the idea of urban renewal? For example, what do you mean by urban renewal? So urban renewal is just a physical changes in physical modifications, or does it involve, for example, social aspect or economic aspect? In a way, in answering this question, this would help you, for example, answer whether you can maintain the social cohesion of a community after renewal process. So it allows you to establish a kind of like understanding towards a broader phenomena, or more specific phenomena. So that would invite you to answer these questions as well. The third type of question that may involve is trying to search for evidence, sources of evidence. For example, you are asked about the physical geography, what factors affect soil erosions? So you need to collect evidence that is related to the process of soil erosions. And other much more specific questions, after you have answered these questions, then you can answer how soil erosions related to agricultural productivity. In this way, you can try to develop a better understanding before you try to establish specific answer. You can try to examine what are the possible factors that account for soil erosion before you answer whether soil erosions can address agricultural productivities. And then there are also questions related to focusing on the reasons about process. For example, it talks about what wastewater treatment. So one of the very important question in contemporary geographical debate is how should we solve the problem of microplastics? So the question that this type of question would ask is the process, because we are talking about the water treatment process. So in order to answer the question, you need to have a very strong understanding about what are the processes that involve in wastewater treatment, chemical process, mechanical process, all these kind of questions. So it involves a kind of like much more deeper understanding towards the process. For example, another type of question which is much more human geography related is to ask for assumptions. For example, we are talking about those areas where territorial disputes takes place. For example, Moldova. So what are the people living in Moldova think about their spatial identity? So what are the spatial assumptions that they have, especially in the kind of like disputed territorial area? This would also related to the kind of like broader question about the geopolitics of the place as well. And then we also ask question about judgment and conclusions. For example, recently it has been identified in a survey that Damascus is the least livable city. So what are the justifications? You are trying to find out what are the justifications, what are the criteria for reaching this kind of conclusion. In a way, that would also inform how this is also a kind of way to ask geographical question, because it also talks about your understanding about sustainable city. And the final type of question that you can find is question related to ethical matters. In human geography, in particular, has been very devote substantial attention to ethics. So, for example, one of the questions that may ask is, should koala be kept as a pets? In a way, it asks the question about animal geographies. So, in a way, this kind of like questions, when you try to design a research related to geography, most likely you will try to make use of a combination of these different questions that could guide your inquiry. Without you may not ask one particular questions, but you have to ask a combination of them in order to formulate your research, your geographical research. So asking the right question is very important when you are trying to design a geographical inquiry. So that is what that also explains, I guess that will be important, because when you are trying to design your fieldwork, when you are trying to design your geographical inquiry, you need to ask the correct question. In the context of fieldwork, you need to ask, how far can my fieldwork answer the questions? This will be something that is also important as far as the fieldwork is concerned.